fall of 1991, a sleepy suburb of Portland, Oregon, was jolted awake when 5-year-old Izzy RH vanished from her bed. Her mother, Elaine, came home from a late hospital shift, tiptoed into the room, and froze. The child's blanket lay perfectly smoothed, the window stood wide open, and a chill crept through curtains that should have been still. The search that followed drew helicopters, bloodhounds, and volunteers by the hundreds, yet it yielded nothing. Izzy seemed to have slipped through the fabric of the world. 9 years later, the first crack in the mystery appeared in the most unlikely form. A dusty toy tape recorder packed away with other childhood keepsakes. When Elaine, now separated from her husband Charles, pressed play, she heard a fragment of audio that no parent should ever hear. The brief, tinny voices on that cassette would later steer detectives toward the most unsettling discovery of their careers. That June afternoon, Elaine stood inside what had once been her family home, sealing the last of her moving boxes. Though the furniture was still there, the space felt hollow. It belonged to Charles now, the final marker of a marriage dissolved under the weight of grief. Charles crouched nearby, his precise carpenter's hand smoothing packing tape across cardboard. 15 years of shared routines lingered between them, even after the divorce. "This one's ready," Elaine said, nudging a box filled with her nursing uniforms and the stethoscope she'd received on graduation day. Charles, 45, broad-shouldered, still sturdy from years of carpentry, hoisted it without effort. "I'll carry this to the car," he replied, stepping toward the door. They worked without chatter, two people bound by memories too painful to voice. Grief had driven them in opposite directions. Charles spent nights in his workshop or therapy sessions, crafting wood to quiet his mind. Elaine buried herself in extra shifts until exhaustion muffled the constant questions. Their arguments began with groceries and electric bills, but always circled back to the unspoken, guilt, blame, and the ache of not knowing. 6 months earlier, they had admitted what both already sensed. Staying married would not bring Izzy home. When the car was nearly full, Elaine asked to visit Izzy's bedroom one last time. Charles gave a silent nod and continued loading boxes. Elaine climbed the familiar staircase, running her hand along the oak banister Charles had installed the year they moved in. Every squeak of the floorboards echoed with memories. Inside the room, time had stood still. Pink walls dancing with hand-painted butterflies, a sticker-covered dresser, and a small bed draped in a My Little Pony comforter. Only the window had changed, now reinforced with locks and bars. Too late to matter. The night of the abduction replayed in her head with brutal clarity. She had come home at 3 a.m. after a double shift, checked on Izzy, and found emptiness where warmth should have been. Investigators scoured the woods, canvassed neighbors, called in federal agents, yet they recovered no fingerprints, no footprints, no trace at all. With no evidence of an out-of-state abduction, the FBI withdrew and the file faded to a cold case. Elaine lifted a silver-framed photo from the wardrobe. Izzy, gap-toothed and shining in striped sleeves and denim overalls. She pressed a kiss to her fingertips and touched the glass. "Goodbye, baby girl," she whispered, tears blurring the image. Then she left the room and descended the stairs. Charles waited beside Elaine's Honda, sweat on his brow from the warm June sun. They faced each other, two people who once promised forever, now navigating separate futures. "You'll be all right?" he asked. "I'll manage," she said gently. "We both will." Charles frowned at the bulging trunk. "Your new place isn't that big. Sure you want all of this?" "If it's tight, I'll rent storage," she answered, softening. "Take care, Charles." He stepped back as she started the engine. "Drive safe." The 15-minute trip to her apartment felt like a journey into another life. The complex was modest, close to the hospital for night shifts. She had rented a small 2-bedroom, one to live in, one for boxes and, perhaps, the past. It took hours and countless trips with the building's rolling cart to unload. Curious neighbors peeked out, but she wasn't ready for introductions. By evening, columns of cardboard stood like silent sentinels around the living room, and Elaine let herself exhale, alone with memories and the hum of a refrigerator in a place that smelled, at last, of change. Elaine collapsed onto her secondhand couch, drained from the move. She knew she should be unpacking essentials, work clothes, toiletries, kitchen items, but her eyes kept drifting to one specific box. Izzy's favorites, it read in Charles's handwriting. She pulled it toward her, unable to resist. Charles had packed it while she dealt with the lease and change of address forms. She'd asked him to gather the things Izzy had loved most. Right on top sat a purple owl plushie, followed by her favorite unicorn and a lineup of soft, familiar dolls. Beneath them were tiny folded dresses and pajamas that still carried a hint of childhood, Johnson's baby shampoo, graham crackers, sunlit mornings. Books with dog-eared pages rested underneath, corduroy, Where the Wild Things Are, The Velveteen Rabbit. And then she saw it. A red and white toy cassette recorder. Not the flashy Fisher-Price version Izzy had begged for, but a knockoff from Toys Plus. That year, they'd been saving for a water heater. The cheaper gift had seemed like a reasonable trade-off. Elaine picked up the recorder, surprised by its weight. The battery compartment was corroded, a crusty mess from leaking AAs. After cleaning it with a tissue and popping in fresh batteries from her junk drawer, she pressed play. A burst of static, then testing, testing. This is Isabella Marie Rhodes, and I'm 5 years old. Elaine froze. 9 years had passed since she'd last heard that voice. Tears streamed down her cheeks as Izzy talked about preschool, her garden butterfly, her friends. Then came something different. Ambient sounds, the rustle of movement, and a voice, Charles's voice, distant but clear. Izzy, come to the princess room when you're done. Remember what I promised. Toys R Us and the new My Little Pony. Elaine sat up straighter. Princess room? She rewound, listened again. Charles's tone was oddly playful, almost too eager. But it wasn't just that. Izzy had never cared for princesses. She loved animals, dragons, unicorns. Maybe it was just a parent thing, a distraction, a bribe. Still, the words stuck with her. She rummaged through the rest of the box but found no My Little Pony toys. Maybe they were in another box, or maybe Charles had kept them. Some memories had been too painful to sort through. Elaine set the recorder down, trying to dismiss the unease. She spent the next few hours unpacking dishes into unfamiliar cabinets, clothes into a smaller closet, family photos onto new walls. But the phrase followed her. Later, while organizing documents, she realized her nursing license folder was missing. She checked every drawer and box marked with her name. Nothing. It was 8:30 p.m. Her shift started at 10. She called Charles. He answered after 3 rings. Elaine, everything okay? I can't find my license paperwork. I think I left it at the house. Would it be all right if I stopped by? He paused. I just left for group therapy. I won't be back until late. She glanced out the window. The sunset painted the sky in peach and gold. I really need them. Can I use my key? Of course. You know where everything is. Just lock up when you leave. Thanks, Charles. I appreciate it. No problem. Good luck tonight. She grabbed her keys. The house key felt heavier now, like something that no longer belonged. 15 minutes later, she pulled into the old driveway. The house sat in stillness, the windows reflecting a fading sky. She let herself in, switching on the lights as she went. The air inside felt familiar, but hollow. She made her way to the bedroom, his bedroom now. The bed looked oddly off with just one pillow. Her jewelry tray was gone, her books too, but the filing cabinet still stood in the corner. She opened the second drawer and found the manila folder labeled medical licenses, right where it always was. Everything was there. Her renewal forms, CE certificates, documents that kept her career intact. She exhaled with relief and tucked the folder under her arm. As she turned to leave, the words from the recorder replayed in her mind. Princess room. What room? She found herself climbing the stairs again. Izzy's room felt larger now without the toys. Sadder, too. Elaine stepped inside, fingers trailing along the empty shelves, scanning the pink walls. No tiaras, no castles, no princess stickers or fairy tales. Just silence. She opened the closet door. It was empty. Metal coat hangers clacked softly in the draft as she brushed past, and the old wardrobe against the far wall gave a tired groan, tipping forward once the weight of Izzy's clothes was gone. With nothing to brace it, the front left leg hovered above the warped boards, proof that 9 damp Portland winters had done their work on the wood. One good nudge, and the piece would crash down, hardly what Charles needed to find in the middle of the night. Elaine glanced at her watch. 7:30 p.m. Harrison's hardware stayed open until 8. If she picked up a few shims, she could steady the wardrobe before heading to her shift. The telephone rang downstairs, shrill in the stillness. Habit moved her halfway to the receiver. Then she stopped. This wasn't her house anymore, and whoever was calling deserved Charles' ear, not hers. She gathered the folder in her purse, turned off the lights, and the ringing cut out. A second later, the answering machine clicked. Charles's recorded greeting played, and a woman's voice followed, kind but worried. "Charles, this is Mrs. Jansen from Group. Please call me back. You've missed 3 sessions now. 3 weeks, Charles." Everyone's concerned. Elaine froze. 3 weeks? Charles had just told her he was on his way to therapy, same as every Tuesday for the past 5 years. Mrs. Jansen had been the anchor of that grief group, the one who kept them standing after Izzy vanished. Why would Charles lie? She locked the door behind her and crossed to the Honda, its vintage car phone still wired in. The evening air smelled of pine and an oncoming drizzle. Street lamps blinked on one by one across the quiet cul-de-sac they once thought was paradise. She dialed Charles's number. It rang 3 times before he answered, sounding winded. "It's me," she said. "Are you at the session?" A long pause crackled over the line. "Yes, well, no. I'm picking up Matthew. You know he lives way out. We'll be 15 minutes late." The words tripped over one another, too quick, too detailed, the same cadence Charles used for every white lie she'd ever caught. "I only asked because a voicemail came in from Mrs. Jansen while I was there," Elaine replied as evenly as she could. He laughed, but the sound was thin. "She hates lateness. I guess she's just checking on me." Late, Elaine thought, was a far cry from 3 absences. "What exactly did she say?" he asked, trying for casual. "Nothing urgent," Elaine lied, unwilling to push further. "Drive safe." "You too," he said, and hung up. Elaine stared at the silent handset. 15 years of marriage had tutored her in every tremor of Charles's voice, and tonight he was absolutely hiding something. She turned the key and eased the car into gear. Harrison's was 5 minutes away, a family store that still survived big box competition on charm and service. As the bell above the door chimed, "George," Elaine's hand searched blindly, desperate for anything, something on the nightstand. Her fingers brushed against a cold metal object. Instinct took over. With all the strength panic could summon, she brought it down hard. Matthew reeled backward, groaning as he stumbled off the bed, one hand to his temple. Elaine bolted upright, heart slamming in her chest. The object clattered to the floor, a small porcelain lamp, now shattered beside a smear of blood. She didn't wait to see how badly he was hurt. Racing for the hallway, she slammed the door behind her and bolted it, then sprinted toward the stairs, her breath ragged, chest tight with terror. Her keys, her purse, still downstairs. Her only thought, get out. She could scream for help once she was on the street. Behind her, the doorknob rattled, then pounding fists. Elaine. Matthew's voice sounded distorted, slurred and strained. You don't understand. She didn't turn back. Bounding down the steps, she twisted her ankle on the last one, but caught herself against the wall. Limping toward the door, she snatched her purse off the floor. Fumbling with her keys, she yanked the front door open just as Matthew's footsteps pounded across the upstairs landing. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a splash of water. She sprinted barefoot toward her car, the gravel biting at her feet, the bag from the hardware store forgotten by the porch. As she yanked open the car door, she heard him behind her again. Closer, louder. She flung herself inside and locked the doors in one fluid motion. Hands trembling, she started the engine and threw it into reverse. Headlights caught Matthew's silhouette on the porch. His arms hung at his sides, lips moving, eyes unfocused. He didn't chase her. Elaine's tires screeched against the pavement as she tore away from the house, heart racing, blood roaring in her ears. It wasn't just missed therapy. It wasn't just a hobby room. Something deeper was unfolding, something far more dangerous than she could have imagined, and she had just stumbled into it. Get a unit to check on the therapy center, find out if Charles Rhodes or Matthew Tenko signed in tonight, and pull any available exterior security footage from the parking lot. The officer nodded and stepped outside, already on his radio. Elaine stood frozen in Izzy's room, barely hearing the words. The pink elephant nightlight still lay shattered near the toppled wardrobe. Dust hung in the air like the past refusing to settle. She stared into the jagged hole in the floor, unable to look away from the dozens of boxes packed tightly into the space beneath. Hundreds of tapes labeled with the same chilling phrase, Princess Room. Each volume carried a new weight now, more sinister than she could fully comprehend. Detective Morrison knelt by the hole, pulling on gloves. He lifted one of the boxes carefully, examining its contents without opening any tapes. We'll need to process all of these at the station, he said, glancing at Elaine. It's likely digital evidence. And if these tapes are what I suspect... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Elaine's mind raced back to the cassette recorder, to Izzy's innocent voice and Charles's coaxing words. Come to the princess room. A phrase that had once seemed harmless, even sweet, now echoed with something else entirely. Something calculated. She turned to Morrison. Detective, do you think Charles knew that he was involved? Morrison's eyes met hers. We don't speculate, not yet, but we take patterns seriously. If Matthew Tenko was hiding these here, and if your ex-husband had access to this room, we'll get answers. Another officer returned. No sign-in records for either of them tonight. Therapy center confirmed. They haven't seen Charles or Matthew in at least 2 weeks. Morrison gave a tight nod, as if that confirmed what he already suspected. Issue a bolo for Charles Rhodes. Start with known associates, relatives. I want this man found tonight. Elaine sank into the edge of the bed, her body sore, her breath uneven. This was her daughter's room, the place where she'd read bedtime stories, braided tiny braids, folded laundry stained with finger paint. Now it felt like something else entirely. A room designed not for a child's dreams, but for someone else's secrets. Outside, the flashing lights bathed the neighborhood in a wash of blue and red. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, murmuring. The house had finally given up its silence. Elaine looked at the tapes again, at the labels neatly scrawled in black marker, the endless numbers like chapters in a long, hidden story. And somewhere, deep in the weight of it all, one terrible truth began to rise. She hadn't just uncovered the past. She had opened the first door into it. Elaine nodded slowly, still trembling. Yes, I think there's a set in the hall closet. He kept them in a long cardboard tube. One of the officers hurried upstairs to retrieve them. Moments later, he returned, handing Morrison a worn set of architectural drawings secured with a rubber band. Morrison unrolled the blueprints on the workbench, flattening them carefully. "This is the original layout," he said, scanning the lines with practiced eyes. "Let's see. Living room, kitchen, main-level bedrooms, basement. Here, see this wall?" He tapped a section near the back of the basement. "According to the blueprint, there should be an extra 4 feet between this point and the outer foundation, but it's not visible here." Elaine moved closer. "That's where he keeps the tool cabinets. Always said they were too heavy to move." Morrison's jaw tightened. Or maybe he didn't want anyone to try. He gave a silent signal, and 2 officers moved to the back wall. Together, they began to shift the large metal cabinets. It took effort. Clearly, they hadn't been touched in years, but eventually the first cabinet groaned across the floor, revealing a wall that looked different from the others, smoother, newer, not part of the original construction. One officer knocked. A dull thud, then a hollow sound. Morrison stepped forward. "Get me a hammer and pry bar." Another officer passed him the tools, and Morrison began working at a seam in the wall's paneling. Piece by piece, a hidden door was revealed, camouflaged behind a false wall of drywall and paint. A narrow seam ran along the edges, and faint scuff marks suggested it had been opened before, though not recently. The silence in the room deepened. Elaine's breath caught in her throat as Morrison tested the handle. It was locked. He turned to his team. "We open it, now." A 4th officer brought over a cordless saw and began cutting carefully along the edge. The metal screeched. Sparks lit the room. Elaine covered her mouth, her eyes wide. After what felt like hours, the blade punched through. Morrison reached into the seam and found a manual latch behind the wall. With a final click, the hidden door creaked open. The smell hit them first. Stale air, old dust, faint rot. Morrison raised his flashlight and stepped through the opening. Behind the wall was a narrow corridor, just wide enough for one person at a time. The walls were lined with soundproofing foam. At the end of the hall was a single steel door. It too was locked, but not for long. Another round of tools, another forced entry. The lock gave way. The door swung inward. What they saw inside stopped them cold. The room was pink. Walls painted the exact shade of Izzy's childhood bedroom. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, each one neatly arranged. A child-sized table, crayons, coloring books, a small bed with faded princess sheets. And in the corner, motionless, frail, curled beneath a blanket, was a girl, a teenager now, with matted hair and thin arms. She squinted at the light, recoiling slightly, instinctively shielding her face. Elaine choked on a sob. "Izzy?" The girl blinked. Her eyes, startled, vacant, frightened, slowly widened as she tried to process what she was seeing. Elaine stepped forward, hesitating only when Morrison gently held her back. One of the officers moved in first, speaking in a soft voice, kneeling beside the bed. "It's okay. You're safe now." Elaine's knees buckled as her heart cracked wide open. For 9 years, she had lived in grief, in doubt, in silence. But in this moment, this impossible, aching, miraculous moment, hope returned. Izzy was alive. Paramedics arrived within minutes, moving with the careful precision of those trained for the worst. One crouched beside Izzy, introducing herself in a soft voice, gently checking vitals while another offered a blanket. Izzy clung to Elaine like a lifeline, still trembling, her eyes darting from unfamiliar faces to the familiar terror she had just begun to question. "She's malnourished," one of the paramedics said quietly. "Signs of long-term confinement. We'll need a full exam at the hospital. Trauma team, too." Elaine nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I'll go with her," she said, her voice hoarse but steady now. "I'm not letting her out of my sight." Detective Morrison stood just outside the pink room, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the warped fairy tale prison around them. "Every square inch of this property gets documented," he told his team, "and I want forensic techs here within the hour. Every tape, every tool, every drawer. We don't miss a thing." One officer stepped out from the closet holding a duffel bag marked camping gear. "Found this tucked behind a false panel," he said grimly. "Full of burner phones, prepaid cards, fake IDs. One of them's for Rhodes. The others, we'll need to run them." "Start the trace," Morrison ordered. "If he's running, I want to know which direction and how long he's been planning it." Downstairs, officers continued cataloging the tapes from the crawl space under the wardrobe. It was now clear Izzy hadn't just been hidden. She'd been documented, manipulated, controlled. Morrison could see it. Months, maybe years of recordings, each labeled like a twisted archive of one man's obsession. Outside, the lights of an ambulance glowed through the windows. Elaine walked beside the stretcher, holding Izzy's hand, whispering reassurances only a mother could give. Izzy gripped her fingers tightly, as if afraid this new reality might dissolve. At the front door, Morrison paused, radio pressed to his shoulder. "Detective to all units," he said. "Be advised, Charles Rhodess is to be considered armed, dangerous, and possibly traveling with Matthew Tenko. Do not approach without backup. Last known sighting was earlier tonight at this residence. Set perimeter alerts on all interstates and airports. Full priority." He turned back toward the house, gaze lingering on the narrow pink hallway that had led them to the unthinkable. They had found Izzy, but they hadn't found him. And now they knew exactly what kind of man they were chasing. Wanted to stay. She loved me. Elaine's hand trembled as officers restrained her, guiding her back toward the patrol car. She could barely see through the tears of fury and disbelief. Charles just stood there, face impassive, as if he hadn't stolen nearly a decade from their daughter's life, hadn't twisted her mind, her body, her trust. Detective Morrison stepped between them. "Don't speak another word, Mr. Rhodes," he said coldly. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." Charles didn't resist, as he was led toward the transport van, though he turned once more to glance at Elaine. That same smug glimmer was still in his eyes. Back inside the patrol car, Elaine climbed in beside Izzy, her breath shaking. Izzy looked up at her, dazed. "Was that Daddy?" she asked quietly. Elaine swallowed hard. "No," she whispered. "That was just a man who hurt people. Your real daddy is gone." The words felt like lead, but Izzy didn't protest. She simply nodded and leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, silent. As they pulled away from Riverside Drive, the flashing red and blue lights slowly faded in the distance. The nightmare wasn't over, but the hold Charles once had was finally broken. There would be trials, headlines, evidence logs, and countless hours of therapy ahead. But in that moment, Elaine held her daughter, alive and free, and for the first time in 9 years, she knew they could begin again. She kissed the top of Izzy's head and closed her eyes. This time, nothing would be hidden. Nothing would be left in the dark. "Search, but I built the space myself," Charles said, his tone eerily casual. "Reinforced walls, soundproofing, even vented the air through an old dryer shaft. Nobody thought to check under the washer. People only look where they expect to find things." Elaine stared through the glass, numb, barely able to absorb the words. Her body was in the chair, but her mind reeled, crashing against a tidal wave of horror that no mother could ever prepare for. Charles continued, still calm, still smiling. "She trusted me. I was her whole world, and she loved me. That's what mattered. She wasn't scared, at least not at first. I made sure of that. I was gentle, careful. She didn't even cry the first time." Elaine covered her mouth, choking back a sob. "She thought it was special," he went on. I told her stories, read her books, I gave her everything. And the others, they understood. They were just like me. We helped each other stay focused. That's what the fellowship was for, to protect what society threw away. Morrison's voice was cold steel. He's admitted enough to guarantee he never sees the outside again. Elaine couldn't tear her eyes from the man she once shared a home with, a man who had calmly orchestrated a child's captivity, broken her reality, stolen her innocence, and called it love. How many others? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We don't know yet, Morrison replied. The tapes, hundreds. The fellowship seems organized, coordinated, but Izzy might be the only one kept this long. Most were exchanges, rotating homes. We're pulling warrants now. Elaine stood, her knees shaky but her voice steadier. I need to see my daughter. Of course, Morrison said. We'll keep you updated, but you should be with her now. He walked her back to the child services room, where Izzy sat on a couch with Sarah, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of warm tea in her hands. Her head turned the moment the door opened. Mommy, she whispered. Elaine crossed the room and pulled her into an embrace. Izzy clung to her, silent but safe, breathing against her mother's shoulder. No fairy lights, no lies, just warmth, just truth, and at last, freedom. What came next wouldn't be easy. There would be therapy, courts, headlines, questions she didn't know how to answer, but Elaine would walk with Izzy through every step of it, because love wasn't secrecy or control. Love was showing up, and this time, no one would ever take that from them again. Elaine sat in silence, the weight of Charles's confession still pressing on her chest. Through the one-way glass, he'd spoken about his crimes like they were achievements, methodical, calculated, sickening in their calm precision. He'd used his skill with carpentry to build a secret life, one buried beneath their family home. He'd forged permits, faked blueprints, cluttered the space just enough to discourage a deeper search. Morrison had listened without flinching, but even he looked shaken when Charles explained how thoroughly he'd planned it all. Elaine's voice cracked. He always prided himself on detail. I worked nights. I never saw the signs. If Matthew hadn't broken in tonight, we'd never have found her. Morrison gave a grim nod. That reckless act might be the only reason we uncovered this. Back in the interview room, Elaine tried to catch her breath. Why would Matthew do this? Why tonight? Morrison opened his notebook. Tenko's been cooperative, frank even. According to him, there was tension between him and Charles for years. In their twisted circle, Charles had status. His videos were the most valuable. Izzy was the most compliant, the most popular. He was their star. Elaine's stomach turned. Matthew grew jealous, Morrison continued. He started developing an obsession with Izzy, but he never found the room. He knew it existed. He just didn't know where. Tonight, he came to steal the tapes. He didn't expect to find you there. When he saw you, he snapped, said you reminded him of her. Elaine went pale. He tried to hurt me. He would have. We know, and he'll face justice for that too. But Mrs. Rhodess, Morrison said softly, what matters now is that your daughter is alive. But there's going to be a long road ahead. She's been isolated, manipulated, emotionally and physically abused. She'll need years of support. I know, Elaine whispered, but we'll walk that road together. They stepped into the hallway. Sarah Martinez was waiting with Izzy, who jumped up as soon as she saw her mother. Elaine swept her into her arms, tears falling again. But this time, they weren't only from grief. The ambulance is ready, Sarah said gently. They'll take you both to the hospital for the full evaluation. They moved to a quieter part of the station to wait. Izzy curled up next to Elaine on the old couch, her small body tense with exhaustion. Minutes passed. Then the tears came. Real ones. Deep, shaking. "The officer told me things," Izzy said through sobs. "He lied to me, didn't he, Dad, about everything. The world didn't end. You're alive. I was just locked away." She looked up at Elaine, shattered. "Why did he do that to me?" Elaine wrapped her arms around her. "I don't know, baby. Some people we trust, can be capable of terrible things, but none of it was your fault, not 1 second of it." "But I loved him," Izzy whispered. "Even when I thought I was helping him, helping the world. I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid," Elaine said, gently stroking her hair. "You were a child. He made you believe lies because that's what predators do. But now you're free, and we're going to rebuild everything he tried to destroy." They sat like that for a long time. Outside, the evidence was being processed, suspects booked. Justice, in its slow-moving way, had begun. But inside the station, for Elaine and Izzy, something more important was unfolding. A reunion, a reckoning, and the first fragile steps toward healing. "We'll need a new place," Elaine whispered. "Somewhere fresh. You'll go to school. You'll make friends. You'll get to be a kid again." Izzy didn't answer right away, then softly, "Will people hate me?" "No, and you don't owe your story to anyone. You get to choose who you share it with, and only with those who earn your trust." An officer appeared at the doorway. "The escort to the hospital is ready." They stood, hands clasped, as they walked down the hall, past officers and detectives and flickering overhead lights. Elaine held her daughter's hand tightly. They had survived the unimaginable. Now they would live. As they neared the exit, Izzy looked up. "I'm scared, Mom." Elaine squeezed her hand. "Me too, but we're together now, and together," she smiled through the tears, "we can face anything." And then they stepped into the night, toward light, toward truth, toward a future no longer stolen, but theirs to rebuild.